Get him out. Now. The guards moved as the billionaire's phone slipped from his hand, its screen flashing 4% battery. Rain dripped onto polished marble. A deal worth more than the building itself was dying in his ear, lost in mistranslation. Laughter rippled through the room. To them, he was just another foreigner unraveling. Then a waitress stepped forward, not loudly, not bravely, just certain. She spoke one sentence in perfect Gulf Arabic. The room froze. The man everyone dismissed went silent because the words she chose didn't translate language. They exposed truth, and the people smirking had no idea the power in the room had already shifted. Rain lashed against the floor, toe-sealing windows of the obsidian New York City's most pretentious dining establishment, located on the corner of 57th and Park. It was the kind of place where a bottle of sparkling water cost more than the hourly wage of the woman pouring it. Ivania stood by the service station, her feet throbbing in the mandatory 3-inch heels. At 23, with a master's degree in international relations gathering dust in her cramped Queens apartment, she was currently invisible. To the Clayonel, she wasn't ever the brilliant linguist who had spent her childhood in Dubai and Beirut, following her diplomat father. She was just waitress number 4, a vessel for delivering Wagyu beef and abuse. Table 7 is waving. Are you blind or just stupid? The voice belonged to Robert, the floor manager. Roet was a man who wore suits that were too tight and possessed a soul that was too small. He managed the restaurant like a dictator, terrified of the owners but tyrannical to the staff. "I'm going," Robert, Ivania said, keeping her voice level. She adjusted her apron, hiding the tremor in her hands. Her mother's medical bills were due on Friday. The clinic in Yonkers had been clear. No payment, no dialysis. She needed this job. She needed the tips. The restaurant was buzzing with the Tuesday night power crowd. Hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and socialites filled the velvet booze. The air smelled of expensive perfume and truffle oil. Ivania navigated the floor with practiced grace, dodging a busboy and arriving at table 7. The customer, a man named Preston, who inherited his fortune and his hairline from his father, didn't look up from his phone. "My steak is cold." "Send it back." "I apologize, sir." "I'll handle that immediately," Ivana said, reaching for the plate. "And tell the chef if he ruins another filt, I'll buy this place just to fire him." Preston sneered, finally glancing at her. "You look tired, sweetie." "Rough night." Ivana smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "Just focused on your service, sir." She walked back to the kitchen, the heat of the pass hitting her face. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs and clattering pans. She handed the plate to the sous chef, ignoring his curse words, and retreated to the shadows of the service hallway to take a breath. She checked her watch. 8:15 p.m. 4 more hours. Just 4 more hours and she could go home, check on her mother, and maybe sleep for 5 hours before doing it all again. That was when the front door swung open. It wasn't a normal entrance. The heavy oak doors were shoved with such force they banged against the stoppers. A gust of wind and rain swept into the pristine foyer, causing the hostess, a terrifyingly thin woman named Lydia, to gasp. The man who entered was a disaster. He was drenched. His black suit, clearly bespoke but currently ruined, clung to his broad frame. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead and water dripped from his nose. He held a phone to his ear, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. He wasn't shouting yet, but the energy radiating off him was nuclear. Lydia, whose job description was primarily gatekeeping, the elite, looked him up and down with open disdain. She saw the wet hair, the lack of an umbrella, and the frantic energy. She didn't see the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist or the terrifying intelligence in his dark eyes. "Sir, you cannot be in here," Lydia said, stepping out from behind her podium. "We have a dress code, and quite frankly, you're dripping on the marble." The man ignored her. He was listening intently to the voice on the other end of the line. "La Ismani." No, listen to me," he barked into the phone. The language was Arabic, sharp and guttural, specifically the dialect spoken in the high-rises of Dubai and the boardrooms of Riyadh. Lydia recoiled. She waved her hand at Robert, who was already marching over, looking like a bulldog scenting blood. Sir Robert's voice boomed. End the call and leave. Now we are fully booked, and we do not allow disturbances. The man pulled the phone away from his ear, his eyes finally locking onto Roet. His eyes were the color of burning coal. I need a table, a quiet one. Now I will pay whatever cover you want. I have a video conference in 5 minutes that determines the future of the Keenan Consortium. I don't care if you're the King of England. Robert sneered, seeing only a wet, angry foreigner. You are making a scene. Get out before I call the police. The man, Dennis Cannonen, felt his chest tighten. He had just sprinted 6 blocks in the rain because his driver had been T-boned by a taxi. Everyone was safe, but the car was totaled. His battery was at 4%. The merger with the distinctive Japanese tech firm Zenith was falling apart because the translators were bungling the contract terms regarding proprietary AI rights. He needed Wi-Fi, a table, and silence. You are making a mistake, Dennis said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. His English was perfect, accented only by an international education. Oxford mixed with the Middle East. I am Dennis Cannon. I own the building this restaurant leases. Robert laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. Sure you do, pal. And I'm the Pope. Security. 2 large men in black suits started moving toward the foyer. Dennis slammed his hand on the podium, the sound that had turned heads. Ismani Yagabi, listen to me, you idiot, he shouted, reverting to his mother tongue in sheer frustration. Anabidi, I want a table, and I want it now. The entire restaurant went silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The elite of New York watched the spectacle with amusement. To them, he was just some unhinged tourist having a meltdown. Robert signaled the guards. Get him out. He's aggressive. Ivania, watching from the service station, felt a jolt of recognition. She didn't know the face Dennis Cannon was notoriously private, rarely photographed without sunglasses, but she knew the tone. It wasn't aggression. It was panic. She knew the dialect. It was the same dialect her father had used when negotiating ceasefires. She saw the guards reach for him. Dennis looked ready to throw a punch which would land him in jail and tank his deal. Ivania didn't think. She didn't check with Robert. She dropped her tray on the service counter and walked straight into the lion's den. Rupert, stop, Ivana said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm enough to make the guards pause. Robert spun around, his face purple. Get back to your station, Ivana. You are fired. Get out. Ivania ignored him. She looked directly at Dennis, ignoring the rainwater dripping from his chin and the wild look in his eyes. She stepped into his personal space, creating a barrier between him and the guards. Yased Tafadal Mahi, she said softly. Sir, please come with me. Dennis froze. The sound of his native tongue, spoken with a flawless cultured accent in the middle of a hostile New York restaurant, acted like a bucket of ice water. He stared at her. She was wearing a cheap uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but her eyes held a calm intelligence. Hal Tatakalamin al-Arabia. Do you speak Arabic? He asked, breathless. Nam, Ivana replied, switching effortlessly. Alan Yajib. The guards are looking for a reason to hurt you. Follow me. I know a table in the back they keep for the owners. It has the strongest Wi-Fi signal. Dennis looked at Robert, then back at Ivania. He nodded once, a sharp military nod. Ivania. Robert screeched, grabbing her arm. What do you think you're doing? I said you're fired. Ivana pulled her arm away. For the first time in 2 years, the fear of losing her job was outweighed by the sheer injustice of the moment. If you touch me again, Robert, I will sue this restaurant for harassment. And if you kick him out, she gestured to Dennis, you will be explaining to the owners why you evicted the CEO of Canaan Global Holdings. She didn't know if he was actually the CEO, but he had claimed to own the building. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Roet hesitated. The confidence in her voice unnerved him. This way, Ivana said to Dennis in English, turning her back on her boss. She led him through the silent dining room. The patrons watched, fascinated by the sudden shift in power dynamics. She took him to table 40, a secluded booth near the kitchen used for VIPs who wanted privacy. Dennis slid into the booth. He immediately pulled a laptop from his leather satchel, his fingers flying across the keys. "Charger," he muttered. "I need an outlet." Ivana was already ducking under the table, plugging her own phone charger into the wall and handing him the USB-C cable. Here he looked at her. Really looked at her for a second. "Thank you." His phone rang again. He answered on speaker, tossing it on the table while he typed. The voice on the other end was Japanese, speaking broken English, sounding furious. "Mr. Kanan." The voice crackled. "The contract, the clause about the neural network, it is unacceptable. Your translators said you want total control." We walk away. Dennis cursed. "No, Mr. Tanaka. That is not what I said. The translation is wrong." He looked at Ivana. Desperation clawed at his face. "Do you speak Japanese?" Ivana shook her head. "No, but I understand contract law, and I know what you're trying to say in Arabic." Dennis paused. The translator on the line, he's incompetent. He's translating my Arabic instructions into English for the Japanese team. But he's missing the nuance of joint custody versus sole ownership. "Put me on," Ivana said. "What tell the translator to speak Arabic to me? I will translate to English for Mr. Tanaka. I know the legal terminology." It was insanity. A waitress mediating a billion-dollar merger. But Dennis had no choice. His battery was now at 2% charging slowly, and Mr. Tanaka was seconds from hanging up. "Do it," Dennis commanded. For the next 20 minutes, Table 40 became a war room. Ivana stood by the table ignoring Robert, who was fuming at the service station. She listened to the flustered translator on the phone, realized he was using the word for domination instead of stewardship, and corrected him. "Mr. Tanaka." Ivana said clearly into the speakerphone, her voice steady. "Mr. Kanan is not requesting exclusivity. He is proposing a wax structure of trust. It is a protective measure for the data shared by both parties, not a seizure of assets. The previous translation was legally imprecise." There was a long silence on the line. A trust Tanaka's voice softened. "Shared stewardship." "Precisely," Ivana said, her eyes locked on Dennis's, "to ensure no third party can leverage the code against either the Quran Consortium or Zenith." Dennis watched her. He stopped typing. He watched this waitress, who probably made $15 an hour, navigate the complexities of international IP law with the finesse of a senior partner. "I see," Tanaka said. "If that is the case, we can proceed to Clause 14. Dennis exhaled a sound like a deflating tire. He slumped back against the leather booth. He pointed to the chair opposite him. "Sit." "I can't, sir. I'm working." "You were fired, remember?" Dennis gave a dry, exhausted smirk. "Sit down." Ivana sat. They worked for another hour. By the time the call ended, the deal was saved. The Zenith merger was back on track. Dennis closed his laptop. The adrenaline crashed, leaving him shaking slightly. He looked around the restaurant. It was emptying out. Robert was standing by the kitchen door, arms crossed, waiting for Dennis to leave so he could destroy Ivana. Dennis turned his gaze back to her. "Who are you, Ivana?" "I'm just a waitress." "Waitresses don't know the difference between Istila takeover and Wak endowment," Dennis said. "And they don't speak the Dubai dialect with a Beirut accent unless they've lived there. My father was Tobias Vance. He was a diplomat in the region." Dennis's eyebrows shot up. "Tobias Vance, the man who negotiated the peace of 09. He died in disgrace, didn't he?" "Accused of embezzlement." Ivana's face hardened. She stood up. "He was framed, and he died of a heart attack trying to prove it. Thank you for the Wi-Fi, Mr. Kernan. I have to go get my things before Robert calls the cops on me." She turned to leave. Wait. Dennis didn't touch her, but his voice was a command. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. It was wet, but the pages were dry. "How much?" he asked. "Excuse me, how much for your time? You saved a $1.2 billion deal. A consultant would charge me 50 grand for that session. I don't want your money." Ivana said, her pride flaring. I did it because I hate seeing people misunderstood and because Robert is a jerk. Dennis stared at her. He had never met anyone in New York who didn't want his money. You're fired, Ivana. You have no job. You have bills. I'll find another job. Not tonight. You won't. Dennis stood up. He was tall, looming over her, but the threat was gone. In its place was a calculating intensity. I don't need a consultant. I have an army of lawyers who can't speak the 3 words of human emotion. I need a translator. Not just for language, but for intent. He tore a check out, but he didn't write a number. He wrote an address. Be at this address tomorrow morning. 800 a.m. sharp. Wear something professional. If you don't have anything professional, buy it. He signed the check at the bottom. It was blank. Ivana stared at the blank check. Is this a joke? I don't joke about business. Fill in whatever amount you need to get to that meeting. But if you're late, don't bother coming. Dennis walked out of the booth. He approached Robert, who straightened up, ready to deliver a scathing remark. Dennis didn't even slow down. He leaned in close to the manager. If you ever speak to her again or give her a bad reference, I will buy this building, evict this restaurant, and turn it into a parking lot. Do you understand, Rert Pold? Yes, sir. Dennis walked out into the rain, leaving Ivania holding a blank check and the bewildered stares of the entire staff. Ivania stared at the blank check sitting on her chipped kitchen table. It was 600 a.m. Outside her window, the grey Queen's morning was waking up with the sound of garbage trucks and distant sirens. To anyone else, that slip of paper was a lottery ticket. She could write $1 million and disappear. She could pay off her mother's medical debt instantly. But Ivania Vance was her father's daughter. Integrity was the only currency that mattered, even when you were broke. She took a black pen and wrote $485,050. It was the exact cost of a charcoal grey suit from a department store in Manhattan, a pair of sensible heels, and a round-trip taxi fare to the financial district. Not a penny more. When she arrived at the Canaan Global Tower at 7:55 a.m., she felt small. The building was a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. The lobby was silent and smelled of ozone and money. Security scanners beeped rhythmically as men and women in suits that cost more than Ivania's entire life. Savings marched through glued to their phones. Ivana approached the front desk. I'm here to see Mr. Canaan. The receptionist, a young man with perfect hair, didn't look up. Do you have an appointment? No, but he told me to be here at 8. Mr. Can is in a breakfast briefing with the board. He doesn't see walk-ins. The receptionist finally looked up, his eyes scanning her off the rack suit. He gave a dismissive sniff. Courier deliveries are around the back. I'm not a courier, Ivania said, channeling the same resolve she had used on Robert. Call his office. Tell him Ivania is here regarding the Zenith merger. The receptionist hesitated. The word Zenith had been all over the financial news that morning. He picked up the phone, whispered something, and then went pale. Top floor, he said, handing her a visitor badge with trembling fingers. Elevator A. Do not make eye contact with Ms. St. Clair. Who is Ms. St. Clair, you'll know. The elevator ride took 40 seconds to climb 60 floors. When the doors opened, Ivana stepped into a reception area that looked more like an art gallery. Abstract sculptures lined the walls, and standing in the center of the room, blocking the path to the double mahogany doors, was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a white Powers suit that looked dangerously pristine. This was Victoria Street Clare, the Chief Operations Officer of Canaan Global. So Victoria said, her voice smooth and cold, You are the waitress. Ivana tightened her grip on her bag. I'm Ivania Vance. Dennis mentioned you. A lucky find in a rainstorm. Victoria walked around inspecting her like a piece of discount furniture. Let me be clear, Miss Vance. Dennis is impulsive. He likes shiny new toys, but this is a billion-dollar company, not a charity ward. I have hired translators from the UN. We don't need someone who serves appetizers. Mr. Canaan seemed to think otherwise last night when his UN translators almost tanked the deal. Ivana replied calmly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. That was a technical glitch and audio feed issue. It was a vocabulary issue Ivania corrected. And if you let me in, I can prove it. Before Victoria could retort, the mahogany doors swung open. Dennis Cannonen stood there. He looked different than the soaked, desperate man from the night before. He was shaved, wearing a navy three-piece suit, and looked every inch the titan of industry. Victoria Dennis said, his voice low, "Move, Dennis. She's unvetted. HR hasn't even run a background check. She could be a corporate SP. She's the daughter of Tobias Vance. If she wanted to destroy us, she'd use a subpoena, not a wiretap. Let her in." Victoria stepped aside, but not before shooting Ivania a look that promised war. Dennis's office was vast, with a view of the Statue of Liberty. He walked to his desk and didn't offer her receipt immediately. He picked up a piece of paper, a photocopy of the check she had deposited via mobile banking an hour ago. $485, Dennis asked, looking at her. "I gave you a blank check. You could have taken more, 50,000. Why didn't you?" "Because that's what I needed for the suit and the ride." Ivania said, "I don't steal." Dennis studied her face. In his world, everyone stole. They stole credit. They stole time. They stole margins. Honesty, he mused, a rare commodity, expensive usually. He tossed a thick file onto the glass conference table. "This is the transcript of the last 3 months of negotiations with Zenith. I have a team of 6 linguistic analysts reviewing it. They say the friction is cultural. They say the Japanese are being difficult." He looked her in the eye. "I think someone is lying to me. Read it. Tell me what you see." Ivania sat down. She forgot about the view, the suit, and the intimidating Victoria pacing outside the glass walls. She opened the file. She began to read. For 2 hours, the room was silent except for the turning of pages. Dennis worked at his desk, but he watched her periodically. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her phone. She read with the intensity of a forensic scientist. Finally, she closed the folder. "Well?" Dennis asked. "It's not cultural friction." Ivania said, her voice shaking slightly with the weight of her discovery. "And it's not a mistake." "What is it?" "It's sabotage." Dennis stood up slowly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Explain." Ivana opened the file to page 42. "Look here. This is a transcript from a preliminary call 6 weeks ago. You proposed a collaborative data sharing agreement. The Arabic phrasing you used was tar awun cooperation. But look at the English translation sent to the Japanese team." She pointed to the text. The translator wrote, "compliance." You didn't ask for cooperation. The record shows you demanded obedience. She flipped to another page. Here you offered a 15% royalty share. The translation reads 15% royalty cap. You were offering generosity. They heard a limitation. Ivania looked up at him. "These aren't errors, Mr. Carnan. A bad translator gets the grammar wrong. These mistakes are consistent. They are designed to make you look arrogant, greedy, and impossible to work with. Someone is trying to make Zenith walk away from the table." Dennis's face was a mask of fury. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Victoria, get in here. Bring Gavin." "Gavin?" Ivana asked. "Gavin Ross, my lead of external relations. He manages the translation team." Moments later, Victoria entered, followed by a man in a sharp beige suit. Gavin Ross was handsome in a slick manufactured way. He had a smile that showed too many teeth. "Dom, what's up?" Gavin asked, breezing in. "We're confirming the lunch with the Saudis, right?" "Sit down, Gavin," Dennis said. He didn't shout. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. Gavin sat, glancing nervously at Ivana. "Who's this?" "The intern." "This is the woman who just did your job," Dennis said. He slid the file across the table. "Ivana says the translations have been altered to sabotage the deal. What do you have to say?" Gavin laughed, but his eyes darted to Victoria. "Sabotage? That's ridiculous. Arabic is a complex language, Dom. Nuances get lost. We rely on third-party agencies." "Stop," Ivana cut in. She hadn't planned to speak, but the lie was too blatant. "It's not third-party. The metadata on these documents shows they were edited internally by a user named GRAdmin. The room went dead silent. Gavin's face drained of colour. He stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. You're going to take the word of some random girl over your oldest friend. I've been with you since the startup days, Dom. And that's why you had the access codes," Dennis said. He walked around the desk. "Why Gavin Zenith is the biggest deal of our lives. Because it's too risky," Gavin shouted, his composure snapping. "Zenith is a sinkhole. If we merge, we lose control of the board. I was trying to save the company from your ego. Dennis, you want to be the king of tech, but you're going to bankrupt us. So you decided to tank the deal and blame the Japanese." Dennis asked. "I did what I had to do." Gavin straightened his tie. "You can't fire me, Dom. I hold the keys to the offshore accounts. If I go, I take the tax structures with me." It was a standoff. Gavin was smiling again, confident in his leverage. Dennis looked at Ivana. "Ivana? What is the Arabic word for blackmail?" "'Tis," Ivana replied instantly. "And what is the penalty fortis in a company where the bylaws state that any executive caught acting in bad faith forfeits their severance and stock options?" Ivania remembered reading about Carnan Global in her research that morning on the bus. She had a photographic memory for text clause 9 section C, immediate termination with cause total forfeit of assets. Dennis smiled. It was a shark's smile. "You heard her, Gavin. You're done. Security is waiting outside. And don't worry about the tax structures. I'll have forensic accountants on them by noon." Gavin lunged. It happened fast. He wasn't going for Dennis. He was going for the file on the table, the evidence. But Dennis was faster. He caught Gavin by the lapels of his beige suit and slammed him back against the wall. The sound of the impact shook the glass dividers. "Get out," Dennis snarled. "Before I forget, I'm a CEO. And remember, I'm just a man who hates traitors." Gavin scrambled out of the room looking like a beaten dog. Victoria stood by the door, her face unreadable. She hadn't defended Gavin, but she hadn't helped Dennis either. "Clean out his office," Victoria Dennis ordered. "And get legal on the phone." Victoria nodded stiffly and left. Dennis exhaled, adjusting his cuffs. He turned to Ivana, who was still sitting at the table, her heart pounding. "Well," Dennis said, "that was an eventful first morning." "Is it always like this?" Ivana asked. "On Tuesdays, usually." He walked over to her. "You have a sharp eye, Ivania Vance, and you have courage. Most people would have stayed quiet. I told you I hate seeing people misunderstood, even billionaires." Dennis looked at her. For the first time, he saw past the utility of her skills. He saw the woman. She was exhausted. Her cheap suit was slightly wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes, but she held herself like royalty. "You're hired," Dennis said, officially executive liaison and lead interpreter. "Salary is $120,000 a year, plus benefits. You start now." Ivania felt the floor tilt. $120,000. It was life-changing. "Thank you, Mr. Cannon. I won't let you down. I know you won't because we have a plane to catch. A plane. The Zenith deal needs to be signed in person to smooth over the mistranslations. We are going to Tokyo tonight." I can't go to Tokyo tonight," Ivania stammered. "My mother, she needs dialysis tomorrow. I have to drive her." Dennis paused. He picked up his phone. "What hospital? St. Jude's in Yonkers?" Dennis dialed a number. "Get me the chief of medicine at St. Jude's." "Yes, this is Dennis Kernan. I want a private room for a Mrs. Vance and arrange for private transport for her treatments for the next indefinitely. Send the bill to my personal office." He hung up and looked at Ivana, who was staring at him with her mouth open. "Your mother is taken care of. Best doctors in the state. Now go home and pack. A car will pick you up in 2 hours. We have a war to win in Tokyo." Ivania nodded, unable to speak. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Mr. Canine, Dennis. Call me Dennis when we are alone. Dennis Victoria." She knew. Dennis looked up from his papers. "What?" When Gavin was shouting, she didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed that he got caught. Dennis's eyes darkened. I know. Keep your friends close, Ivana, but keep your enemies on the payroll where you can see them. Be careful around her. Gavin was a blunt instrument. Victoria is a scalpel. Ivana walked out of the office, her mind racing. She had the job, she had the money. But as she walked past Victoria's empty desk, she felt a chill. She had walked into a world of wolves, and she was the only one without claws. Or so she thought. The Gulfstream G650 sliced through the clouds above the Pacific. Inside the cabin, which was quieter than a library and more luxurious than most Penis, Ivania Vance stared at the dark ocean below. She was sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass, afraid to touch the vintage champagne Dennis had poured. Dennis sat across from her, his tie loosened, reviewing the Zenith dossier, but he wasn't reading. He was watching her reflection in the window. "You're thinking too loud," Dennis said, breaking the silence. "I can hear the gears turning." Ivana turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm just wondering if I remembered to turn off the coffee pot in Queens. It feels like a lifetime ago." It was 12 hours ago. Dennis closed the folder. "Forget Queens. For the next 3 days, your reality is Tokyo and me." There was a weight to his words that made the cabin feel suddenly smaller, more intimate. "Why me, Dennis? You could have hired the best interpreters in the world after you fired Gavin. Why a waitress? Because the best interpreters tell me what people say." Dennis replied, leaning forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You told me what they meant and you stood up to me. In my world, if only a people either fear me or want to use me. You did neither." He reached across the narrow aisle and rested his hand on hers. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "I need someone real, and I think you're the most real thing that's happened to me in a decade." Ivana's breath hitched. The air between them crackled with an unspoken attraction that had been building since the restaurant. But before she could respond, the pilot's voice announced their descent into Honda Airport. Tokyo was a sensory overload. Rain slicked the streets of Rangi Hills, reflecting the kaleidoscope of neon signs. They were whisked in a black limousine to the Aman Tokyo Hotel. "We have 2 hours to freshen up," Dennis said as they entered the lobby, a soaring cathedral of stone and paper lanterns. "Then we meet Tanaka at his private estate. This isn't a boardroom meeting. It's a tea ceremony. It's a test of character." Ivania went to her suite, which was larger than her entire apartment building. She found a box on the bed with a note from Dennis Armour for the battlefield. Inside was a navy blue dress, modest but impeccably cut, made of silk that felt like water. When they arrived at the Tanaka estate, a traditional oasis in the middle of the modern city, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. the Tanaka. An elderly man with eyes like polished obsidian greeted them with a bow. The dinner was an intricate dance. Dennis spoke in English. Ivania translated into Japanese, but she did more than translate. When Tanaka made a subtle reference to a cloud passing over the moon, Ivania didn't translate the metaphor literally. She turned to Dennis and said, "He is concerned that your recent firing of Gavin Ross indicates instability in your leadership. He needs reassurance that the chaos is over." Dennis nodded, understanding the subtext. He looked at Tanaka. "The cloud has passed." "Tanakan. The sky is clear. We are ready to build." Tanaka's face relaxed. The tension broke. By the time the sake was served, the two men were laughing. The deal was not just saved, it was solidified. As they left the estate, walking toward the waiting car under a shared umbrella, Dennis stopped. The rain created a curtain around them. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice rough. "I just did my job." "No, you saved me again." Dennis dropped the umbrella. He didn't care about the rain. He cupped Ivana's face in his hands. The moment hung suspended in time, the billionaire and the waitress standing in the Tokyo rain. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was hungry, possessive, and desperate. Ivana melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. For a moment there was no company, no debt, no Victoria, just this fire. When they broke apart breathless, Dennis rested his forehead against hers. I don't know what this is, Ivana, but I don't want it to stop. Neither do I, she whispered. But as they got into the car, Dennis's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and the warmth evaporated from his eyes. What is it? Ivana asked, sensing the shift. It's Victoria, Dennis said, his voice turning to ice. She says there's been a security breach. Someone accessed the Zenith source code from inside my Tokyo server. Ivana felt a cold knot in her stomach. Is it bad? It's catastrophic. If that code leaks, the deal is dead. And this time, there's no fixing it. The next morning, the atmosphere at the Canaan Global Temporary offices in the Moroni district was suffocating. Dennis had been up all night with the cybersecurity team in New York. He looked haggard at the previous night's romance, replaced by a ruthless focus. Ivania sat in the corner of the conference room, feeling useless. She had tried to offer coffee, but the analysts ignored her. We traced the IP a tech lead said over the speakerphone. The breach happened at 200 Hz AM Tokyo time. The files were sent to a secure Dropbox owned by Helix Corp, our biggest competitor. Dennis slammed his fist on the table. Who sent it? I want a name. We're decrypting the user log now. Give us a minute. The door opened and Victoria walked in. She had flown in on a commercial flight arriving unannounced. She looked fresh, sharp, and dangerously calm. Victoria? Dennis frowned. What are you doing here? I came to handle the fallout, Dennis, since you seem distracted. She glanced at Ivana with a look of mock pity and to deliver the bad news personally. What bad news? The tech team is too polite to say it. Victoria placed a tablet on the table. I ran the trace myself. The files were sent from a device registered to the internal network, a device that was granted access yesterday morning. She swiped the screen. A photo of a laptop appeared. MacBook Pro serial number ending in 889 assigned to Ivania Vance. The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Ivana stood up, her legs trembling. What? That's impossible. I was asleep at 200 a.m. Were you, Victoria asked coolly, or were you sending a retirement fund to Helix Corp? I checked your bank account, Sana. A deposit of $500,000 was made to an offshore account in your name at 2:15 a.m. I don't have an offshore account. Ivana's voice rose, bordering on panic. She looked at Dennis. Dennis, you know me. I didn't do this. I don't even know how to access the source code. Dennis stood slowly. He looked at the tablet, then at Ivana. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. The trauma of Gavin's betrayal was still fresh, an open wound. He had trusted Gavin for 10 years, and Gavin had stabbed him in the back. Now the evidence pointed to the woman he had known for 48 hours. Dennis, Ivana pleaded, stepping toward him. Look at me. This is Victoria. She hates me. She set this up. I set it up, Victoria scoffed. I'm the COO of a billion-dollar company. You are a waitress who needed money for her dying mother. Desperate people do desperate things, Ivana. Did Helix offer to pay for the kidney transplant, or maybe a heart? The mention of her mother hit Ivana like a physical blow. Dennis looked at Ivana. His eyes were devoid of the warmth from the night before. Did you leave your room last night? No. I was sleeping. The keycard log shows your door opened at 1:45 a.m. and closed at 2:30 a.m. Victoria read from a report. Ivania gasped. I went to get ice. The machine in the room was broken. It sounded weak even to her own ears. You went to the business center, Victoria corrected. Where the secure terminal is. Dennis turned away from Ivania, looking out the window at the grey Tokyo skyline. Get out. Dennis, please. I said, get out. Dennis roared, spinning around. The pain in his eyes was terrifying. I let you in. I let you into my head, into my business, and you sold me out for $500,000. I didn't. Ivana was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I am being framed. You have to believe me. The evidence is right here. Dennis pointed at the tablet. Security escort Ms. Vance out of the building. Revoke her clearance, and Victoria call the police. I want her charged with corporate espionage. Two guards grabbed Ivana's arms. No, Dennis! Ivania screamed as they dragged her backward. You're making a mistake. It's her. It's Victoria. Dennis didn't look at her. He stared at the table, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles turned white. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her pleas. Inside the room, the silence was deafening. Victoria picked up the tablet, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. I'll handle the police, Dennis. You focus on salvaging the Zenith deal. We can spin this. We'll say she was a rogue employee. Dennis nodded mechanically. He felt hollow. The betrayal tasted like ash. Outside on the street, it was raining again. Ivana was thrown out of the building, her bag tossed after her. She stumbled onto the wet pavement, humiliated and broken. Passers-by stared at the crying foreign woman in the navy silk dress. She had no job. She was about to be arrested. Her mother was in a hospital paid for by the man who now hated her. Ivania wiped her eyes. She looked up at the skyscraper where Dennis was. Despair threatened to drown her. But beneath the tears, the spark of the waitress who had stormed a billionaire's table flickered back to life. She knew she was innocent. She knew Victoria had falsified the logs, probably using the same access Gavin had left behind. She checked her phone. She had maybe an hour before the police tracked her down. She couldn't run. If she ran, she looked guilty. She needed help. She needed someone who understood technology better than Victoria. She needed someone who hated Canaan Global as much as she currently did, but who hated injustice more. She scrolled through her contacts. She didn't have many. But then she remembered something. The Zenith deal, the Japanese side. Mr. Tanaka. Tanaka had looked her in the eye. He had respected her, and Tanaka was a man of honor. Ivania hailed a taxi. She didn't have much cash left, but she had the blank check Dennis had given her, the one she had never cashed beyond the suit money. She still had the checkbook stub with the routing number. Where to? The driver asked. The Tanaka estate. Ivania said, her voice trembling but firm. And drive fast. She wasn't going to run. She was going to declare war. The heavy wooden gates of the Tanaka estate were formidable, guarded by men who looked more like statues than security. Ivana stood in the rain, shivering in her ruined silk dress, clutching the gates bars. Please, she shouted in English. I must speak to Tanaka-san. It concerns the honor of Zenith. The guards didn't move. A black police cruiser turned the corner down the street, its lights flashing silently. They were coming for her. Panic clawed at her throat. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. A voice dry and ancient crackled through. Open the gate! Ivana stumbled inside, just as the police car slowed down outside. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her in a sanctuary of silence. Mr. Tanaka stood on the porch of the main house, wearing a traditional yukata. He looked at the disheveled woman who had impressed him with her integrity only hours before. You are a fugitive, Miss Vance, Tanaka said calmly. Why should I not hand you over because you value truth? Ivania said, her voice shaking, but her eyes fierce. Dennis thinks I stole the code, but I didn't. I need your technology to prove it. Victoria Street. Claire spoofed my IP address. I know it. Tanaka studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked inside. Come, my technicians are the best in Tokyo. If there is a lie in the code, they will find it. Inside a server room that hummed with cooling fans, Ivana watched as 3 young engineers worked on multiple screens. Tanaka stood by her side. The log shows the upload came from your laptop, one engineer said, pointing to a string of green text. MacBook 889. I was asleep, Ivana insisted. Is it possible to fake a device ID difficult, the engineer said. Unless he typed a rapid command. Unless the device wasn't on the Wi-Fi. Look here, the signal strength. He pointed to a graph. The signal for MacBook 889 was 100%. That means it was right next to the router in the business center. But the key card log says you were in your room on the 40th floor. The business center is on the 2nd floor, so Someone took my laptop, Ivania asked. No, the engineer said, his eyes widening. The MAC address. It's a clone. See this ghost packet. This command was sent from a device named admin v override. It masked itself as your computer, but the mask slipped for 0. 4 seconds during the handshake protocol. Tanaka leaned in. Admin v, Victoria. Ivana breathed. She didn't just frame me, she hacked her own company server to do it. Tanaka's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. In his culture, betrayal of business partners was a sin. Betrayal of one's own team was unforgivable. The signing ceremony is in 1 hour, Tanaka said, checking his watch. At the Cannes offices, Dennis intends to sign a restrictive version of the deal to apologize for the breach. We have to stop him, Ivania said. We will, Tanaka replied. My car is ready. The conference room at Canaan Global's Tokyo branch was solemn. The air smelled of stale coffee and defeat. Dennis sat at the head of the table looking 10 years older. He held a fountain pen over the contract, a contract that gave Zenith 80% control, a desperate move to save the merger after the theft. Victoria stood behind him, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder. She wore a look of concerned professional triumph. It's the only way, Dennis. She whispered, we cut the cancer out, but we have to pay the price for her actions. Sign it and we can rebuild. Dennis stared at the paper, the betrayal still twisted in his gut. He had wanted to believe Ivana. He had wanted to believe in the magic of that rainstorm. But the numbers didn't lie. He lowered the pen to the paper. Bang! The double doors flew open with a force that rattled the windows. Every head turned. Standing there was not security, but Mr. Tanaka. And beside him, head held high, was Ivana. Tanaka's son. Dennis stood up confused. We were waiting for you. Why is she here? Security. Sit down, Dennis. Tanaka ordered. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of an emperor. If you call security, the deal is dead forever. Dennis froze. He looked at Ivana. She walked into the room, ignoring Victoria's gasp. You shouldn't be here. Dennis said, his voice hard. The police are looking for you. The police should be looking for the person who actually stole your code, Ivana said. She didn't shout. She spoke with the calm precision of a translator. Tell them, Victoria. Victoria laughed a nervous, brittle sound. This is pathetic. She's desperate, Dennis. She's manipulated Mr. Tanaka. Ivana didn't look at Victoria. She looked straight at Dennis. Al-Haka. The truth does not hide, she said in Arabic. You told me you needed an interpreter for intent. Look at the screen. Tanaka's engineers had already hijacked the conference room's projector. A massive image appeared on the wall, the server logs. That is the breach, Ivana explained, pointing to the red lines of code. And that the image zoomed in is the source. Device iPhone 15. Pro Max, user VST, Claire private GPS location, the Amen Hotel Business Center, time 20 a.m. The room went deathly silent. Victoria's face drained of all color. She lunged for the laptop controlling the projector, but Tanaka's bodyguard blocked her path. It's a fake! Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering. She forged it, Dennis. She's lying. The logs are digitally signed by the Zenith Security Corps, Tanaka said quietly. They cannot be forged. You stole the code, Miss St. Clair. You sent it to Helix to crash the stock price so you could buy the dip. We found your purchase orders scheduled for this morning. Dennis turned slowly to look at Victoria. The betrayal he felt earlier was nothing compared to this. This was a viper he had nurtured in his bosom for 5 years. Victoria Dennis said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Is this true? I did it for us, Victoria cried, backing away. You were giving away too much. You were letting this waitress run the company. I had to save you from yourself. You're fired, Dennis whispered. Then his voice rose to a roar that shook the walls. You are fired. Get out of my sight before I throw you out the window myself. Victoria fled the room, sobbing, her career and reputation in ashes. Dennis stood alone in the silence. He looked at the screen, then at the contract, and finally at Ivana. She stood there, exhausted, vindicated, but looking incredibly sad. Ivania Dennis stepped toward her. "I don't," Ivana said, holding up a hand. "You didn't believe me. You checked the logs, you saw my name. And you threw me to the wolves. You didn't ask me. You didn't trust me. The evidence was a lie." Ivana cut him off. "But your lack of faith was real." She turned to Mr. Tanaka and bowed deeply. "Arigato goasu Tanaka-san. Thank you for saving my life. You saved yourself, child," Tanaka said with a bow. Ivana turned and walked out of the room. Ivania Dennis shouted, running after her. He caught her in the hallway, grabbing her hand. "Please wait." Ivania pulled her hand away. "I'm going home, Dennis to Queens. To my life." "I will make it up to you," Dennis pleaded. The billionaire who commanded armies of employees looked terrified. "Name your price. Anything. Double the salary. A partnership." "I don't want your money," Ivana said softly. "I wanted you to see me. Really see me. Not just as a useful tool or a pretty face, but as a person who wouldn't sell her soul for a check." "I see you now," Dennis said. "I swear it's too late." She stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, leaving Dennis Karan standing alone in the hallway of his own empire, realizing he had just lost the most valuable thing he had ever found. 6 months later, the Obsidian restaurant on 57th Street was busy. Ivania walked in, but not through the service entrance. She wore a tailored cream suit, her hair loose and shining. She walked to the host stand. Robert, the manager who had fired her, looked up. His jaw dropped. "Table for one," Robert stammered. "Table for two," a deep voice said from behind her. Dennis walked in. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't soaked in rain. He was holding a bouquet of white lies, her favorite. He had spent 6 months graveling. He had flown to Queens every weekend. He had donated a wing to St. Jude's Hospital in her mother's name, anonymously. He had learned to wait. Ivana looked at him. She didn't smile, but her eyes were warm. She had made him work for it. She had made him earn her trust back, brick by brick. "You're late," Ivana said. "Traffic," Dennis replied, handing her the flowers. "And I was practicing my Arabic." "Oh, let's hear it." Dennis took a deep breath. He looked at her with total vulnerability. "Ana aif, wana uhibuki. I am sorry, and I love you." The entire restaurant was watching. Robert looked like he was going to faint. Ivana took the flowers. A smile finally broke across her face, radiant and real. "Your accent is terrible," she teased, "but I accept the apology." She took his hand. "Come on. I'm starving, and I hear the filler here is excellent, if you don't send it back." Dennis laughed a sound of pure relief. "For you, I'll eat it burnt." They walked to their table, not as Billionaire and Waitress, but as equals, partners in language and business, and finally in love. And that is how a single moment of courage from a waitress changed the course of a billion-dollar empire. Ivania proved that true power isn't about the money in your bank account, but the integrity in your heart. Dennis learned the hard way that trust is fragile, and that sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one serving the coffee. It's a reminder to all of us. Never underestimate anyone, and never let anyone underestimate you. If you were Ivania, could you have forgiven Dennis, or would you have walked away for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.